Chapter 12. Mason, Dixon, and Masculine are in a punch house on Cock Hill called the Moon, sitting like an allegorical sculpture titled Awkwardness. It is not easy to say which of them is contributing more to sustaining the tableau. Mason is suspicious of Masculine. Masculine struggles not to offend Mason. And Dixon and Masculine have been estranged from the instant Dixon, learning of Masculine's residence in Pembroke College, Cambridge, brought up the name of Christopher Smart. Durham lad. He became a fellow at Pembroke. A gust of panic crosses Masculine's face briefly, then his curatical blank returns. Mr. Smart was our perennial Seton Prize winner. He left 2 years after I arrived, our intimacy being limited to meal times when I brought food to the fellows' tables, and fetched away his soiled napery and his gnawed bones. Sometimes after that all gone, we of the scullery would eat their leavings. His may have been among 'em. I did not distinguish closely. I was a lad, and not all aware of how uncomfortable a life it must have been. To live at Cambridge, to step where Newton stepped. I would have become a servant's servant. Newton is my deity, Dixon rather blurts, ignoring Masculine's efforts to show polite astonishment by raising one eyebrow without also raising the other. And Mr. Smart, when I knew him when I was small, a rather older lad who came to Raby on his school vacations, his father being steward of the Vane estates down in Kent, you see, as was my great-uncle George of Raby. Masculine now has his eyeballs rolled to heaven as if praying for winged escape. So both of us quickly learned our way around the larders, the trysting places, the passageways inside the walls, where our errands often took us, Mr. Kitts being usually to or from the chapel. I can recall no one marking in him any unkind moment, though he did seem, each time he returned to Raby, a bit more preoccupied. In 56, I believe, he was confined in a hospital for the insane, says Masculine, his field creature's eyes a-sparkle, and released, I have heard, the year before last, mad as when he went in. Why, aye, Dixon grimly beams. It must have been that Raby Castle that did it to him. Well, it certainly wasn't Pembroke, Masculine sniffs. Indeed, 'twas only when poor Smart gave up Cambridge that his mind began to leave him. Away from those healthy surroundings, Dixon replies, with clenched amiability. There is commotion, as the landlord, Mr. Blackner, and several regulars, leaning to hear, lose all idea of their centres of gravity and, staggering in the puddles of ale that commonly decorate the floor of the Moon, go crashing among the furniture. Mason, as if newly arrived, speaks at last. Forget not London itself as a preeminent author of madness. Greenwich to Grub Street, the place is not for everyone. Drawn though we be to the grandeur, the 100 villages strewn all up and down the great inlet from the sea, and the wide world beyond. Yet for many the cost, how great! Masculine, choosing to hear in this a rebuke, snaps. Perhaps too many damned Gothical scribblers about, far too many's what did for Mr. Smart, seeming in his turn to allude to Mason's earlier announced preferences in entertainment. As Mason considers some reply, Dixon gallantly fills in. Why, Grub Street, Pub Street, sir, the ghastly fop, vampires of Covent Garden, come, worth a dozen of any Tom Jones, sir. This receives Masculine's careful smirk. He fancies it a smile, but 'tis an attitude of the mouth only. The eyes do not engage in it, being off upon business of their own. The impression is of unrelenting wariness. I'd expected such to lie up Mr. Mason's lane. Hadn't supposed your own taste to run there as well. Excellent way to pass those obless nights, I imagine, reading each to the other. Mr. Blackner has appeared. I always fancied the one about the Italian with no head. That'd be, now, Count Senzacapo. Do any of you know that one? Excellent choice, sir. Dixon, as it seems merrily. The episode with the 3 peasant girls. And those illustrations, the lads, lewdly chuckling. Yet surely, Masculine all but whining, there's far too much of it about, encouraging, his voice dropping, all these melancholic people. He gestures round the room with his head. This island especially is full of them. 6 months I've been here, too many idle minutes to be filled, soon pile up, topple, and overwhelm the healthiest mind. Serious business, cackles the proprietor, sliding away to other mischief. Damn the fellow, Masculine clutching his head. Something else coming here, Dixon advises. Mason looks up. Ah, the natives from the kitchen. Masculine, what is it, a cannibal sacrifice? No, Mason screams. Worse. Worse, Dixon murmurs, by which time all can see the candles upon the great iced cake being borne out to them as its escort bursts into, for he's a jolly good fellow. Mr. Blackner brandishes an invisible spoon. Assembled it myself, sir, though my apprentice here did the icing. They found out, whispers Masculine. But how? Do I talk in my sleep, whilst they listen at the door? Why would I mention my birthday in my sleep? 'Twas last week anyway. Congratulations, much joy, wish Mason and Dixon. 29's foul shadow, oh, how inhospitably final year of any pretence to youth. Its dreams now, how withered away. Though styled a prime, yet bidst thou adieu to the prime of life. There in the Stygian mists of futurity, loometh the dread 30. Transition unspeakable, prime so soon fallen, thy virtue so easily broken, into a number divisible, penetrable by 6 others. At each of Masculine's dismal apostrophes, the merriment in the room takes another step up in loudness, though muffled in cake. The ale at the Moon, brewed with the run-off from up country, into whose further ingredients no one has ever inquired closely, keeps arriving. Thanks to masculine, now fully a ball. 4th decade of life, thy gates but a brief year ahead, though in this place a year can seem a century. What holdest thou for the superannuated? Marriage, shouts a sailor. Death. The morn. All the pewter rings with dour amusement. You're a cherry lot for being so melancholic, masculine raising his tankard. When are you leaving? I'll miss you. Mason and Dixon have been looking over at each other in some agitation. When masculine at last takes himself outdoors, Dixon sits up briskly. Just reviewing this. I am to leave you for at least 3 months in the company of this gentleman. Is that more or less? Dixon, the sector doesn't work. What? The Sisson instrument. Someone's put the plumb line in wrong. The change he's looking for in the position of Sirius would span but a few seconds of arc, yet the error owing to the plumb line is much greater, enough to submerge utterly the result he seeks. Yet he continues here under Royal Society orders, as now, apparently, do we. They talk like a sober man. Who can get drunk in this terrible place? Cock ale tomorrow, cock ale tomorrow, screams a Malay running into the room, holding by the feet a dead fighting cock, trailing its last blood in splashes, like characters death would know how to read. Why then, 'tis damn Ben Coolin all over again, with as little freedom to demur, yet I might find a way to fix his plumb line for him. Would they at least let me have a look at it before I leave, that is? Pray you, do not even bring up the topic of instruments with him. The one he's obliged to go on with, will he, nil he, has far more than money invested in it. Nonetheless, 'tis the friendly thing to do. I'm John Birch's field rep, aren't I? Certainly know my way around a sector. Tricks with beeswax and breath that few have even heard of. Back comes masculine fussing with his cue. Think about it, Mason whispers in some panic, as the other astronomer locates his seat, sits and peers at them suspiciously. Dixon, with a beefy grimace meant to convey righteousness. Nah, I'm going to ask him. Fine, go ahead. I withdraw from this in advance. It's between you two. Dixon's eyebrows shoot hatward, signalling mischief. Well, that's too bad, Mason. My next question to Mr. Masculine was to have been, pray thee, sir, might I buy the next round out of my own pocket? Blessed be thy own generosity for fare, of course. Ah! Mason brings his head to the tabletop in a controlled thump as Mr. Blackner immediately appears with 3 gigantic pots of today's cock ale. Rum suck, gents, and if Mr. Mason can resist it, why then you gents may divide this 3rd pot between you. Compliments of the house. Mr. Blackner's receipt for cock ale is esteemed up and down the India route, and when these Malays stop in town with their travelling cockfights, the main ingredient being suddenly plentiful, cock ale, as some might say, is in season. Mr. Blackner prefers to soak the necessary dried fruit bits in mountain or Malaga wine instead of canary, and to squeeze the carcass dry with a cunning Chinese duck press, won at Ukraine from a fugitive aristocrat of that land, in which force may be multiplied to unprecedented values, extracting mystic humours not obtained in other receipts. Masculine looks from one astronomer to the other. Excuse me for asking, and as a curate only, lies there between you some lack of complete trust? More like a lapse of attention, murmurs Mason, reaching for one of the ale cans. It seemed a perfectly friendly request, Masculine keeps at it. Is he often at you like this, Mr. Dixon? Shall I have to guard my own tongue? Doesn't work. Whatever you say, from good morning on, he'll find something in it. Yet, if you could refrain from good morning, Mason advises Masculine, the rest of the day would fall into place effortlessly. I shall miss your good advice, Mr. Dixon. When informed that he must return to the Cape directly, Dixon remains strangely calm. 'Tis said of the French astronomers that they never turn their instruments, be it out of pride or insouciance or some French sentiment we don't possess, whilst what seems to distinguish us out here is that we do. We reverse our sectors, we measure everything in both directions. It follows, if we've got two clocks, that we must find out all we may of their separate goings. And then, exchanging their positions in the world, be it thousands of leagues removal, note the results. 'Tis the British way, to take the extra step that may one day give us an edge when we need one, probably against the French. Small investment, large reward. I regard myself as a practitioner of British science now. I'll be sure to pass the word along to London, Masculine gentle as lie. When Mason and Dixon arrived in St. Helena, the observers' teams exchanged clocks. Dixon, barely ashore, turning about and taking the Shelton clock back to the Cape by the next ship out, and Mason setting up the Ellicott clock in Masculine's rooms in James's Town. For a short while, the two clocks stood side by side, set upon a level shelf, as just outside, unceasingly, the ocean beat. However well sprung the bracket arrangements, these walls were fixed ultimately to the sea, whose rhythm must have affected the pendula of both clocks in ways we do not fully appreciate. The pendulum, as is well known, being a clock's most sensitive organ of communication, here allowing the two to chat in the interval between the one's being taken from its shipping case and the other's being nailed up in its own to go with Dixon to the Cape. Both are veterans of the transit of Venus, as well as having been employed hour upon dark hour in astronomers' work, from equal altitude duty to the timing of Jupiter's moons, which back and forth like restless ducklings keep vanishing behind their maternal planet, only quickly to reappear. You'll be on duty 24 hours is what it comes to, the Ellicott clock advises, along with the usual fixation upon one's rate of going. So what's it like in Cape Town? The other wishes to know. The air is ever moist, as you'd say, replies the Ellicott clock, whose only knowledge of the Cape has been gathered in the rainy season, before going on then to recite a list of horologic ailments it currently suffers from sluggish mainspring to Bruget's palsy, the others bob swinging along in sympathy. Then I collect all there's not waterproofed. They do take advantage of every break in the weather to make it more so. Alas, and what else then? The Dutch clocks, what are they like? Of course, much will depend upon you. Some get along with Dutch clocks quite well. Haven't Dutchmen for generations been living with Dutch clocks in the house after all, even whilst they sleep? Indeed, 'tis exactly that Dutch stolidity of character that's required, for their clocks strike each quarter hour, and without warning, bong bong sort of effect, takes a certain personality is what I'm saying. The Ellicott clock is referring to the absence of a striking train, which in British clocks can usually be heard in motion a bit before the hammer begins hitting the bell. But in those Cape clocks that happen, like the Vrooms and the Siemens, to have been made in Holland, 'tis rather cams upon a separate wheel geared to the minute hand that cause the striking, so there is never warning. Says the other, and how'd your British observers react to that? Mason, being the more phlegmatic of the two, kept silent longer, his rage, however, rising bit by bit at each unannounced striking, till at last it must brim over. Dixon, in whose care you'll be, preferred to express himself otherwise, choosing, each time he was caught unawares, to, scream. And most vexedly, too, I sets of timepieces rods to humming, damn if it don't. I must hope that my own remain less resonant with his cries then, mustn't I? He soon relents and vows never again to be assaulted so rudely. Yet sure as time, 15 minutes later, 'twill happen again. He could never, not even upon his last day there, remember that Dutch clock was going to strike. They share a tremolo of amusement. Wonderful chatting with you like this. Well, let's just tick these off once more. There are the rains, the rudeness of the native clocks, the mental instability of the astronomer upon whom I shall be depending utterly. Anything we've left out? The gunfire at the curfew, which has never once been on time, and might easily lead, in the uncautioned, to loss of sanity. In that case, allow me to thank you for your part in preserving mine, though I do so in advance, for who knows when we'll next meet. Next transit of Venus, I suppose. 8 years hence. Do hope it's not that long. Time will tell. Anything you'd like to know about St. Helena? Or Masculine? I hear steps coming. Quickly then. Masculine is insane, but not as insane as some, among whom you must particularly watch out for. Too late. 'Tis Dixon and a ship's carpenter, and before either clock can bid the other adieu, the Shelton clock is taken, crated up, and stowed aboard the taut and lacquered Indiaman, straining at her anchor cables to be out in the trades again. And indeed, what they wanted to talk about all along was the ocean. Somehow they could not get to the topic. Neither clock really knows what it is, beyond an undeniably rhythmic being of some sort, though they've spent most of their lives in range of it, sometimes no more than a barrel stave and a hull plank away. Its waves, beats have ever been with them, yet can neither quite say where upon it they may lie. What they feel is an attraction, more or less resistible, to beat in synchrony with it, regardless of their pendulum lengths or even the divisions of the day. The closest they come to talking of it is when the Shelton clock confides, "I really don't like ships much." "Huh? Try being below the waterline in one that's under attack sometime." "Not sure I want to hear about that." "Thank you. There's never much to tell, so I have to embellish. 'Tis a task I'm happy to avoid." when Dixon and the Shelton clock are alone at last. Well, here we are, sailing back to Cape Town, and all for thee. So, the clock. Interesting work, I'll bet. The clock cannot compensate for fine quivering in its pendulum, which Dixon notices. They've probably been hearing tales about me, setting a jangle all the sensitive clockwork with my screaming. Yet think of these episodes as regular tonics, without which they might succumb to the weather, which can get unusual, or the ways of the Dutch. Watch out for the pox, Dixon in turn advises his coadjutor just before stepping into the boat. You thought the Cape was something. This place, it's, shaking his head, risky. A fair of damned souls, if they like. Clouds loom, ocean rains approach. As if there'd ever be any time. Now, what of Masculine? Oh, he should watch out for it too. I am resolved upon no further criticism of any brother lens. Dixon, with eyes raised sanctimoniously. Even one to whom right ascension may require a wrong or two. Howbeit, thou know him better than I. You seem to be saying that I should look out for myself. Did I say that? I didn't say that. As he sees Mason's head begin its slow lateral reciprocation. Thou said that. Thank ye, Dixon. Always useful, talking these things over. Well, convey my warm sentiments to any there who may feel yet such for me. That won't take long. Mind yourself, Jerry. Mind the clock. See there, Christmas tide, Charlie. End of chapter.